Grandmother played favorites my entire childhood, so I made sure her favorite paid all her bills. I'm watching my cousin sign his name on the nursing home paperwork, the cheap ballpoint pen stuttering over the line where it says financially responsible party. And I swear I can actually hear the click in my brain when the last 25 years finally rearrange themselves into something that almost looks like justice. His hand is shaking, just a little, the way it does when he's stressed and trying to pretend he isn't. There's a smear of blue ink on his thumb. The admission coordinator is smiling that professional, sympathetic smile they must practice in the mirror, and my grandmother is sitting in a wheelchair by the window, criticizing the curtains. "Why is it so beige in here?" she mutters, loud enough that everyone can hear. "It's like a waiting room for death." "Mark, tell them I like blue." "They'll change it if you tell them." She doesn't look at me once. Not when we walked in. Not when I wheeled her down the hallway. Not now, when I am the person who found this place, toured it, checked the health inspection reports, and fought with 3 different social workers to get her approved. Her eyes follow my cousin around the room like he's the sun, and she's some sad old planet still trying to orbit. "Sure, Gran," Mark says, like he isn't swallowing hard after reading the monthly fees. "We'll ask." It was a Tuesday afternoon when I got the call that started all of this. I was at my desk, pretending to care about a spreadsheet, thinking more about what I was going to make for dinner than quarterly growth, when my mother's number lit up my phone. I almost let it go to voicemail. Mom's just checking in calls usually start with pleasantries and end with a list of things she's worried about that I can't fix. But it was my lunch break, and ignoring her just meant dealing with more guilt later, so I picked up. She didn't even say hello. "Your grandmother fell," she blurted. "She's in the hospital." That sentence hit me with a weird mix of dread and something else. Not relief exactly, just the feeling you get when a slow-motion disaster you've been watching for years finally passes the point of no return. "What happened?" I asked, already grabbing my bag, even though I hadn't decided if I was actually going. "She tried to get down the back steps on her own," Mum said. "Stubborn as always. Slipped." The neighbor heard her yelling. "They think her hip is fractured. They're talking about rehab, maybe more." More did not need explaining. More meant she might not be able to live alone anymore. More meant someone is going to have to take charge. And in my family, someone has always meant me, unless it's something nice, in which case it means my cousin Mark. Growing up, if you looked at our family from the outside, it probably seemed like the usual semi-dysfunctional extended clan. Loud holiday gatherings, too much food, the occasional argument about politics at the table. Only if you were in it did you see the gravity that warped everything around one delicate, old-fashioned woman in pastel cardigans and pearls. My grandmother, June, was not a monster. That would make this easier to explain. She didn't hit us. She didn't scream. She wasn't drunk or cruel or neglectful in the ways people think of when they hear someone say, "I had a difficult childhood." She just ranked us. My cousin Mark and I were born 6 months apart. He was my aunt's first child, and I was my parents' only. Grandma liked to tell the story of how she held him in the hospital, counted his fingers and toes, and said, "This one will be special." She never told a story like that about me. From as early as I can remember, there was Mark, and there was the girls, me and my 2 younger female cousins, like we were a blur in the background of his movie. At Christmas, his presents were slightly bigger, slightly newer, slightly more expensive. We all noticed. Nobody said anything. At 8, he got a remote control car. I got a jigsaw puzzle for your clever brain. At 12, he got a brand new bike. I got a secondhand keyboard because you like music. When I brought home straight as on my report card, she'd say, "Well, of course you did. Darling, you're a girl, you're studious," and then turn to Mark and exclaim over his 1B+ in science like he'd split the atom. She'd slip him $20 notes for snacks and tell him not to tell the others. She called him my boy in a tone that made the phrase sound like it had capital letters. When he scored a goal in soccer, she claimed it like a personal victory. When I won a statewide essay competition, she asked if there had been many entries. None of this is particularly dramatic on its own. It's the accumulation, the years of small imbalances that mess with your head. As a kid, I dealt with it the way kids do. I tried harder. When Mark knocked over her favorite vase, playing indoor cricket, I helped sweep up the pieces and took the blame so she wouldn't be mad at him. When he forgot to visit, I'd go twice and tell her he was studying. I thought if I was good enough, useful enough, she'd see me. Instead, I became a convenient assistant in the long-running production of Grandma and her grandson. It wasn't that she was awful to me. She just treated me like a secretary. Can you go make some tea? Be a dear and fetch my cardigan. Write this check for me. You have such neat handwriting. The first time I realized it was really not normal was when I was 15 and my parents were arguing in the kitchen after we left Grandma's house. My aunt had just told us that Grandma was thinking of leaving the house to Mark one day because he's the only boy and it's the tradition. We still lived in a rented unit that smelled like our downstairs neighbor's cigarettes. We've given her rides, done her shopping, fixed her bloody gutters. My dad snapped, slamming the pantry door. And somehow our kid is still the backup option. Mom shushed him, glancing at me. It's her house, she said. She could do what she wants with it. I stood there in the hallway, feeling like I'd just stumbled onto a conversation I wasn't meant to hear about my own ranking. It wasn't just about the house. It was the principle. Even in hypothetical inheritance scenarios, I was extra. I tried to swallow it the way I'd swallowed every small sting before, but it did something to me. I started noticing more. The way my grandmother introduced us to her friends at church. This is my grandson, Mark. He's so busy with his studies. And this is Emma, my other grandchild. She helps me with errands. In year 12, I graduated top of my class. My parents took me out to dinner. Grandma sent a card that said, "Well done, dear. Don't let it go to your head." That same year, Mark scraped into a business degree at a mid-tier university, and she threw him a party. I left for university in another city partly because they had a good program and partly because I needed physical distance from the constant comparison. My parents, bless them, scraped together what they could so I didn't have to commute. I got a scholarship, worked part-time, learned how to live on pasta and instant coffee. Grandma called occasionally. The conversations were always the same. Are you eating properly? Do you have nice friends? Mark says his campus is so modern. If I mentioned my grades, she'd change the subject. As adults, Mark and I weren't close, but we were still entangled. Family has a way of doing that. You never fully shake people you shared a paddling pool with. He got a job at a mid-sized firm thanks, in part, to one of Grandma's church friends. I got a job in budgeting for a local council. We would see each other at birthdays, weddings, graduations. He'd show Grandma photos of his new car. I'd bring her homemade soup after she was discharged from hospital. She'd brag about him to anyone who would listen. With me, she'd brag about him too. "Did you hear Mark might be promoted?" she'd say while I was changing the batteries in her smoke alarm. "He's such a hard worker. I'm literally hanging off your ceiling right now." I'd reply, and she'd laugh like I'd made a joke. When Grandpa died, everything sharpened. He'd been the quiet buffer, the one who'd sneak me a biscuit in the kitchen and say, "Don't mind your grandmother, love, she's stuck in her ways." Without him there, her focus on Mark intensified. It was like losing her husband made her double down on the idea that the man of the family must be preserved at all costs. She started talking more openly about her will. "The house should stay in the family," she told Mark one afternoon, sitting at the table while I watered her plants. "You'll take care of it. The girls will have their husbands' houses." I froze, water sloshing onto the floor. "Gran," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Some of us might not get married, or might not want to rely on our husbands for housing." She waved a hand. "Modern nonsense," she said. "You'll see. Mark will do the right thing. He always does." My dad was livid when I told him. "We've been up that ladder fixing her storm damage more times than Mark has been at church," he said. "I refuse to be sentimental about that house if she doesn't even see what we've done." At some point, after another tense Sunday lunch that ended in Mom crying and Dad going for a walk, I stopped trying to win Grandma over. I still visited. I still drove her to appointments when my mom couldn't. I still filled out her forms and sorted her medicine into one of those plastic boxes with days of the week on it. But I stopped looking for her approval like a thirsty plant craning toward a stingy window. Which brings us back to the fall. By the time Grandma went into hospital with a fractured hip, Mark had moved interstate for work. We all expected that if anything happened, He'd swoop in as the golden grandson, but work became his shield. "I wish I could be there more," he'd tell her on loudspeaker, standing in his nice kitchen in his nice apartment. "You know how it is with the company. They need me." So when she fell, it was me at the hospital within the hour. My job lets me work remotely sometimes, and my boss has aging parents too. So when I said, "My grandmother has had a serious fall," she just said, "Go." Grandma looked small in the hospital bed, her hair flattened on one side, her leg in a temporary brace. She still managed to complain. "They woke me up at 4 in the morning to take blood," she grumbled as I adjusted her blanket. "Vampires. The nurses are just doing their jobs," I said, though truthfully I didn't love hospitals either. "Has Mark called?" she asked almost immediately. "Not yet," I said. "He might not know. I came straight here." She sniffed. "He's so busy. Important job. They'll make time for him." It was like a reflex at this point. I let it slide off me and asked about her pain instead. Over the next week, I met with doctors and social workers, learned more about hip fractures in the elderly than I ever wanted to know. Words like mobility and fall risk were thrown around. The physio watched her struggle with a walker and shook her head slightly. "Living alone is going to be very difficult," she said to me in that voice professionals use when they're talking to the sensible relative. They asked about her home. "Stairs?" "Yes, 3 steps at the front, 2 at the back, laundry downstairs." "Support?" "My mom comes by, but has her own health issues. I live 40 minutes away and work full-time." "Mark?" "Interstate. You might need to think about residential care," the social worker said gently. "At least for a while." I knew what Grandma's answer would be before they even asked her. "No," she said, with more force than she'd used for anything in days. "I'm not going into one of those places. That's where people go to die." It took a lot of conversations to even get her to tour a facility. She only agreed when the physio spelled it out. "If you go home alone, you will fall again. Next time you might not get back up." I did the legwork. I called places, I made appointments, I studied brochures. Mark, to his credit, flew down for a weekend to help, which mostly meant showing up to one tour and making critical comments about the decor. We ended up at the place we're in now because it was the least depressing. The halls are bright, they have a little garden, the staff-to-resident ratio isn't terrifying. It's also expensive. There's this thing people don't talk about enough. How complicated and messy old age is when you're not rich. There are assets, there are income thresholds, there are government programs that only kick in if your house is assessed at a certain value. There are forms written in bureaucratic that you need a translator for. My job in budgeting and numbers suddenly became relevant in a way I wish it hadn't. When we sat down with the facility's financial manager, she laid it all out. "Your grandmother's pension covers this much," she said, drawing a neat column. "There's a daily fee, an accommodation deposit, additional services. Do you plan to sell her house?" Grandma stiffened. "No one is selling my house," she snapped. "Mark will need it." The manager blinks at her politely. "If you don't sell, you can put a refundable deposit against the house, but someone will need to pay the difference in monthly fees." She slides a paper over. "The gap is significant." My stomach dropped. I did the math in my head with the speed of someone who lives in spreadsheets. My parents couldn't cover it. I couldn't cover it without nuking my own future. "What about Mark?" the manager asked, glancing between us. Grandma turned to him expectantly. "You'll sort it out," she said, as if he were the one who had been handling her phone calls and toilet accidents for the last month. "You're good with money." Mark looked at the numbers and went pale. "That's a lot per month," he said. "Can't the government—" "There are subsidies," the manager said, "but with the value of the house, your grandmother doesn't qualify for full assistance. In other words, you own too much on paper to be considered needy, even if you don't have cash floating around." We left with a folder of paperwork and an uneasy silence. That evening, Mom called, her voice sounding thin over speakerphone. "We can't help," she said. "You know that, right? The best we can do is manage her pension for her." "I know," I said. I'd already played out that scenario. "What's Mark saying?" I thought of his face in the office, the way his eyes darted around the room instead of settling on the figure at the bottom of the page. "He's processing." That's when the slightly petty slightly righteous idea started forming in my mind. Here's something important. I did not trick anyone. I did not forge signatures or hide information. I'm not some mastermind villain with spreadsheets of revenge. What I did was give Mark the chance to be exactly what Grandma always insisted he was. The man of the family, and then step out of the way. A few days later, we had another meeting with the facility's financial department. This time it was all three of us, me, Mark, Grandma. Mom stayed home. Hospitals made her anxious. The woman slid the forms across the table again. You can either pay a large refundable lump sum secured against the house, she explained, or you can pay a smaller deposit and higher monthly fees. In either case, the gap between your grandmother's income and the cost will need to be covered by a family member. I turned to Mark. You're executor on her will, aren't you? I asked, already knowing the answer. Grandma had told us years ago, casually, that when I go, Mark will sort things out. He's a man. He understands. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. She wanted you in charge, I said. My voice was calm. She trusts you. I looked at Grandma. Right? She beamed at him. Of course. You've always been the responsible one. I could have argued. I could have pointed out that responsible apparently meant living another state away and visiting twice a year. That I was the one who knew her medication schedule by heart. That I had a copy of her bank statements in my bag because she'd handed them to me months ago with a vague, "You're good with this stuff, dear, you do it." Instead, I smiled politely and shut up. The manager, smelling the dynamic in the room like blood in the water, slid the financially responsible party form toward Mark. Normally a close family member signs this, she said. It doesn't have to be legally, but makes things smoother. Mark hesitated. What does responsible mean exactly? It means that if your grandmother's income doesn't cover the fees, we bill you for the difference, she said. You can then recover costs from the estate later, if applicable. Later, from the estate. The house, in other words. I watched the conflict play across his face. If he didn't sign, he was essentially saying to Grandma's face, I won't help you. The same grandmother who had made him the center of her universe, who had told everyone for years what a good boy he was, who had promised him the house. If he did sign, he was attaching himself financially to a very expensive, open-ended commitment. He looked at me then, maybe hoping I'd jump in, offer to share the responsibility, be the sensible one as always. I held his gaze and said, carefully, they need someone. I didn't add, it's your turn. I didn't need to. Grandma reached out and patted his arm. You'll take care of it, won't you? She said. You're my boy. I know I can count on you. He swallowed. Then he picked up the pen. I watched him sign. Watched the ink soak into the paper. Watched the favorite grandson become, officially, the one who would get the invoices every month. It wasn't pure revenge. Part of me genuinely believed that if anyone should be responsible for her bills, it should be the person inheriting the major asset. She had spent years telling all of us that the house was Mark's future. Fine. Let the cost of preserving that future be visible instead of invisible labor done by the women around her. Afterwards, in the car park, he rounded on me. You could have said something, he hissed. I did, I said. I said they need someone. You know what I mean, he snapped. You could have volunteered, or suggested we split it. My hands were steady on my car keys. Can you afford it? I asked. He looked away. Yeah, he admitted. It'll be tight, but yeah. I can't, I said bluntly. I'm barely keeping up with rent and student loans. Mom and Dad are on a pension. If I sign something like that, we're all screwed. He opened his mouth, then closed it. And besides, I added, letting just a hint of edge into my voice, Gran always said you were the man of the family. Seems fitting. His jaw clenched. You're enjoying this, he accused. I thought about 10-year-old me pulling weeds in Grandma's garden while she watched Mar play video games inside. About 16-year-old me helping her fill out forms while she told her neighbor on the phone that Mark is the only one who really looks out for me. About 30-year-old me taking her to the doctor while she bragged about his latest promotion. I'm not enjoying it, I said, but I'm not stepping in front of it for you either. He glared, but he didn't have a comeback. In the weeks that followed, I did what I always do, the unglamorous, unseen work. I moved Grandma's clothes into her new room. I labeled her drawers. I made sure the staff knew she liked her tea strong and her toast barely browned. I set up her direct debit, so her pension went straight to the facility. I visited twice a week, called on the days I couldn't, and fielded her complaints about the food. Mark visited once a month, if that. But now, every time he walked through the door, there was a new kind of tension in his shoulders. "How's it going?" I'd ask, as Grandma lectured a nurse about how to fold towels properly. He'd shrug. "Fine," he'd say. "Bills keep coming." At one point, 3 months in, he cornered me in the hallway. "Do you know they charge extra for everything?" he demanded, waving a crumpled invoice. "Haircuts, physiotherapy, some stupid lifestyle package. It's like a hotel from hell." "Yep," I said. "That's aged care." "She refuses to sell the house," he said. "Yep," I said again. "Her choice." "She said she doesn't want strangers pawing through her things," he mimicked bitterly. "So I'm just supposed to cover this indefinitely?" "You can always have the 'we should sell the house' conversation," I said. "Good luck with that." He stared at me. "You really don't feel any responsibility?" I laughed, not kindly. "I spent my entire childhood being responsible for everyone's feelings and schedules," I said. "Now I'm responsible for her day-to-day care and administration. I'm just not responsible for her preserving an asset she wants to give you." It took him a long time to answer. "I didn't ask for that," he muttered finally. "Neither did I said. "The thing about money is that it makes patterns visible. Before, Grandma's favoritism cost me mostly in invisible ways. Time, emotional labor, the quiet erosion of my sense of worth. Now, for the first time, it was costing Mark something tangible. And no, I didn't dance on his financial grave. I watch him adjust. He stopped leasing new cars every 2 years. He stopped taking as many weekend trips. He complained a lot. But he paid. Every month he paid. One afternoon, I came by while he was there, and I overheard Grandma saying, "I don't know why the girls can't help you with the money, dear. They're so selfish." I stepped into the room. "The girls are helping," I said, keeping my tone level. "We're just paying in different currencies." She frowned, not understanding. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means Mom brings you clothes and cooks your favorite food on weekends," I said. "I handle your appointments and paperwork and listen to you complain about the curtains. Mark handles the bills. Everyone is helping." She pursed her lips. "You know, I'd leave the house to you girls too if I could," she said, like it was an afterthought. "But you'll be fine. You're so capable. Mark needs it more." There was the old script. I met Mark's eyes over her head. For the first time, there was something like understanding there. Not quite remorse, not quite gratitude. Just the realization that the pedestal he'd been on his whole life came with a weight he hadn't noticed until now. A few months ago, Grandma's health took another dip. More falls, more confusion, a short, scary hospital stay for pneumonia. She came back weaker, more easily exhausted. The staff started using words like palliative approach. We had a family meeting in one of those little rooms with bad art and tissues on the table. The nurse explained what comfort care meant. My aunt cried. Mom cried. Mark stared at his hands. I asked practical questions because that's what I do. Afterwards, in the car park again, Mark lit a cigarette. I didn't even know he smoked. "She's not going to be around much longer," he said. "No," I said. He flicked ash onto the asphalt. "I always thought, when she went, I'd get the house, and that would be like, I don't know, my safety net." He laughed, a harsh little sound. "Now I'll be lucky if there's anything left after all this." I could have said, "Welcome to the female experience of being told to be grateful for breadcrumbs." I could have said, "Maybe that's fair." Instead, I said something that surprised even me. "You'll be okay," I said. "You got a good job. You're not going to be on the street." He looked at me sideways. "You're not mad?" "Oh, I'm mad," I said. "I'm mad about a lot of things that have nothing to do with the house. But I'm not mad that the money she spent on your inheritance is being spent on her care instead." He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "When you put it like that, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel when she goes. Grief is messy even without decades of favoritism baked in. I know I'll miss pieces of her. Her stories about growing up in the country, the way she said my full name when she was impressed with me even if she pretended she wasn't. I also know there will be a part of me that exhales in relief because the source of this weird, constant comparison will finally be gone. I didn't engineer some grand, cruel revenge. I didn't sabotage Mark's life. I didn't steal anything. All I did was stop cushioning him from the consequences of being the chosen one. I stepped back and said, you know what? For once, your favorite can actually be responsible for the person who worshipped him. Grandma played favorites my entire childhood. She made sure we all knew our rank. She told the world Mark was her rock, her future, the one who'd look after her. I just arranged things so that, when it counted, her story was true. He paid her bills. I paid in time and tears. And somewhere in the middle of all that, the scales between us shifted a little closer to something like balance.